In today's video, we're taking a look at some trade rumors around Patrick Kane. There's new information suggesting the Dallas Stars may be a player for his services. Could Jacob Chychrun finally be traded? And could he end up with the Ottawa Senators? The Edmonton Oilers have a few interesting moves they are considering as well, including dipping into free agency externally. Plus, we have news from the UFA world. John Klingberg finally has a new home. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to take a look at today. First up, the biggest news today is John Klingberg signing a contract. Finally, one of the biggest names in the UFA market who's been waiting for quite some time to find the right deal. Of course, we just talked in the last few days how he's recently changed agents. Of course, he must have been frustrated with his previous agent and the lack of ability to get a deal done. It was rumored that he was looking for a 7 or 8 year deal, ideally 8 years to stay in Dallas before the season was over. Looking at around $8 million per season. Certainly, Dallas had no appetite for that, and it was going to be really tough cap-wise to do that as well. And as we get to free agency, it doesn't look like they really had any teams lining up to offer Klingberg big money with term. There was believed to be a lot of other teams in the mix besides the Ducks that were willing to entertain him on a short-term deal for, something around what he's going to end up getting here. You got a 1 year deal at $7 million with Anaheim. But it's just, I guess they really overplayed their hand here, thinking that the market was going to be better than what it was. So we'll have to see what this means for him. My guess is that it's an opportunity for him to kind of bounce back and have a better season. I think it's fair to say Klingberg's didn't have a horrible year last year by any means, but certainly didn't have a fantastic year either. He can hopefully go to Anaheim. He can play a solid top 4 role, hopefully get a lot of power play time, have some good stats. And assuming the Ducks are not in the playoffs, he could be one of the bigger names moved at the NHL trade deadline and find a new home, have a solid finish, and then try this again next season. That's kind of my interpretation of what I think is going to end up happening here. Now, of course, if the Anaheim Ducks surprise and do not make it into the playoffs this coming season, then maybe Klingberg doesn't move and he ends up staying for the entire season. The Ducks are kind of difficult to predict right now. The West is going to be tough and tight to an extent, but I do think if there's a team out there in the West that could make a leapfrog forward and maybe surprise some and maybe steal a playoff spot, I think it very well could be them. So we'll have to wait and see. They've made lots of new additions this season. Obviously some veteran players to kind of mix in with their youth. So we'll see how this goes in Anaheim, but I think this is going to be a bit of an experiment for Klingberg, trying to kind of rebound, so to speak, and hopefully find a long-term deal next year. I don't know that he's really going to be able to extend and get any kind of significant term with the Ducks either, but time will tell. Another significant signing today as well. The Ottawa Senators have announced Matthew Joseph has been signed. If they avoid arbitration with him, they had his arbitration hearing coming up in a couple of days. He gets a 4-year deal at $2.95 million. And to me, this is an absolutely fantastic signing. As we've been calling it, the summer of Pierre Dorion continues with another good move here. Joseph, of course, was acquired around the NHL trade deadline from the Tampa Bay Lightning in exchange for Nick Paul. Nick Paul had a good fit in Tampa, had a good run with them in the playoffs, was a really good third-line player for them, had a chance to play top 6 due to injuries as Point and Cirelli and other guys went down throughout the playoffs, and he fit nicely there. Nick Paul ended up getting a 7-year deal from the Lightning, mainly to keep the AAV low. And I think this is basically this deal that Joseph is getting is kind of what Ottawa was offering to Nick Paul before he was dealt. They were offering, it was rumored to be 3 to 4 years, around $3 million or a little less. So this is essentially the same deal. So they get a player who's a little bit younger than Paul, not drastically, but still Joseph is a little younger. They get the term they wanted. Different dynamic. Of course, Nick Paul mostly plays center, but of course the Sens didn't really need him to be a long-term center either, given the fact that they have Josh Norris, Timmy Stützle, and Shane Pinto lined up to go 1, 2, 3 down the middle already. So they get Joseph, who's certainly a very speedy winger, certainly a lot faster than Paul for sure. but certainly a guy who can kill penalties, do a lot of the same things, just a little bit different from the wing, and they get the contract that works well for him. Like I said, his numbers are slightly less established, but he does have some great playoff experience from his time in Tampa and a couple of Stanley Cup rings to his name, which certainly won't hurt when it comes to building things in the locker room when they're getting closer to being more competitive into the playoffs, and hopefully at some point having more of a chance to win. So that was a great signing, I think, from Ottawa's perspective with Matthew Joseph. The Anaheim Ducks, as well as signing Klingberg, also signed their 2022 first-round draft selection, taking number 22 overall. So 22 and 22, Nathan Gaucher, who's a center from the Quebec Ramparts, gets his 3-year entry-level contracts in the works here as well. The Philadelphia Flyers have signed Owen Tippett as well. He was a restricted free agent. Of course, he was the main piece that came back when they traded Claude Giroux at the NHL trade deadline to the Florida Panthers. He gets a 2-year deal with an average annual value of $1.5 million. So we'll have to see if Owen Tippett can take a big step this year, have a full season in the NHL, hopefully play some sort of a top 6 role, because that's, I think, where he needs to be able to score. I'm not really sure he's cut up to be a bottom 6 guy, so we'll have to see where he fits, especially in Philly with the new coach John Tortorella. Be interesting to see how that works out, but I know the Flyers were pretty high on him. He did score a lot of goals in junior, but has yet to be consistent in his couple of years as a pro. But the AHL levels hasn't been too bad for him. It's just getting it done at the top levels where things need to go. Of course, Sami Niku is another player I want to talk about today. Of course, Sami Niku, formerly of the Winnipeg Jets, Montreal Canadiens, is leaving the NHL, at least temporarily. We'll see if he makes a return at some point. Still in his mid-20s, but has had a hard time catching on. Didn't get a qualifying offer this year. He's signing a 1-year deal to play over in Finland for the coming season. So, like I said, we'll have to see if he ever makes a return. A couple of updates as well. One coaching change. The New Jersey Devils are adding another coach to their staff. Ryan McGill comes over as an assistant coach. He had previously worked for the Vegas Golden Knights. McGill's certainly kind of coach. He has a great track record of working with like D and PK and things like that. So he'll be a great addition to the New Jersey staff. Of course, they already added Andrew Brunette as well. So they have lots of great coaches surrounding Lindy Ruff there as the head coach. But I do think Lindy is going to be on a short leash depending on how they start. They have lots of qualified people there to take over, with Brunette being the most likely, and the rest of the staff very well could remain in place as well. The San Jose Sharks also announced today that they're going to be honoring Doug Wilson at a game on October the 15th, coming up in the early part of the new season at their home arena, of course. Doug Wilson will be honored. I'm not sure if they're going to do like a Ring of Honor or like some sort of a banner tribute for their longtime general manager. Of course, he was there as a player through early expansion, so he's played there for a fair bit of time, and then also was a GM, which seemed like forever. So they're going to honor him for his significant contributions as both a player and executive. So that'll be done in early October, which is certainly very well deserved. He was there a really long time and played a major role in the franchise for an extended period of time. Now, as I mentioned, on to some of the rumors section of the video. Let's start with the Edmonton Oilers. There seems to be a persistent rumor about Phil Kessel maybe being a UFA signing by the Edmonton Oilers. It was even brought up by Jeff Merrick on the 32 Thoughts podcast. They put out a surprise midsummer episode here that came out today, and Kessel's a player that even Merrick talked about, saying how he can see him going there, and if he did, that he would, theoretically, he'd have a good chance to be successful playing on the wing with either McDavid or Draisaitl. Obviously at this point in his career, Kessel's still very durable. Obviously the current Ironman streak in the NHL. And really last year on a poor team in Arizona, they didn't have great results, but he still put up a lot of assists. He's was more of a play driver than he was a goal scorer, but still, Kessel's still relatively productive. And he could be an interesting fit there. Now, of course, he's coming off the end of his contract, which was the biggest one of his career, that he originally signed with the Maple Leafs before he was ever traded, which he's, of course, moved around a couple of times between the Leafs to the Penguins to the Coyotes. So now he's yet to find himself a new home. I would think it's going to be a short-term deal. I don't think it's going to be a lot of money wherever he does end up, assuming he's going to sign and play somewheres. The Oilers would be an interesting fit. The only question I would say is that right now, if you look at their cap situation, it shows them on cap friendly as being over, but that's because they don't have the LTIR kicked in in yet. They have Mike Smith and Oscar Clefbaum contracts that are going to be going on long-term injury reserve, which would give them around 3 point something million thereabouts in available cap space, but they have not yet signed RFAs Ryan McLeod and Kyler Yamamoto. So those two contracts are probably going to come close, if not all, of eating up the remaining amount that they could go over the cap. So to bring in anybody externally would likely mean money has to go out somewhere. So there's already rumblings about that, given the fact that things are pretty tight as it is in Edmonton. So a couple of the main, usual suspects, you could say, is potential trade players here. One would be Warren Foegele, who's got 2 years left at $2.75 million. So he's a player that hasn't really worked out. Got traded from Carolina for Ethan Bear. That deal really hasn't worked great for either team, to be honest. And Foegele could be on the move again. It might be difficult to do, though, given his 2 years in the term. I'm sure he's a player that Ken Holland's probably more than willing in trying to find a new home for, but yet to be successful in that. There's been some rumors about Puljujarvi. Now that he's under contract, could he still be moved? I'm not really sure that they're going to be honest. I think he might be more likely to stay than go. And then there's always Tyson Barrie. I know when Duncan Keith retired, a lot of people assumed that was going to be the kind of the cue for Barrie to not be traded, because there was a lot of talk that Tyson Barrie could be a cost-cutting move on the back end, given the fact that Evan Bouchard is more than capable now of running the power play. You got Darnell Nurse back there making a ton of money, so you need him to contribute offensively as well. And then maybe a guy like Barrie with 2 years and $4.5 million might be a luxury they can't afford anymore. It might be a player they could move to garner an area of other areas. So there's been some talk about Tyson Barrie to Montreal. I've seen that a few times. Obviously, that stems mostly from Jeff Petrie getting traded out of Montreal. And it's not a half bad idea, to be honest. I don't know that there's really any linkage or any rumor suggesting that they would talk, but I can see the potential fit there. Maybe they get futures in return. I know they have some forwards in Montreal that they could maybe do a trade with, but they all make similar money. I don't know that there's really a good fit. There at some point I've seen Mike Hoffman, Josh Anderson. I don't really know that their Oilers would be able to take on another player like that. Maybe signing a guy like Kessel for cheaper might be the easier way to go here. So if that's the case, depending on what Kessel's contract works out to, I don't know that Barrie would necessarily be the guy. Foegele would probably be the preferred player to move, but we'll have to wait and see. But if the Edmonton Oilers are, if they're able to bring in a guy like Kessel, that's going to cut down on the top 6 minutes for guys like Yamamoto and Puljujarvi. So I do wonder how they're going to navigate through that. Might be an interesting third line, but we'll have to wait and see what the Oilers do. But definitely money needs to go out for sure if they're going to have any hope in doing that. And of course, there's been a lot of rumblings about Jacob Chychrun to the Ottawa Senators. We'll have to see where this goes. Ottawa media has been talking a bit about it. I know on the Wally Mathot show, Brent Wallace mentioned in the episode that came out a couple of days ago when he interviewed Claude Giroux after the signing, he said that he had sources telling him that the Chychrun talk to Ottawa was definitely not over, that they were still exploring that. And then I see Mark Mathot on Twitter today, not really coming out and saying he has sources telling him anything, but I think he probably knows more than what he's letting on. He just doesn't really, he's not normally one of those insider kind of guys, but being a former player connected to the community, knows lots of people. He went on Twitter to say that he knows for a fact that Chychrun would be happy to come to Ottawa should that come to fruition, and that he's been watching and seeing that he's happy with all the other moves and direction of the team and all that type of stuff, which is a little out of character from a thought to go on the record to say those things. So that tells me he definitely knows something. The big thing with the Chychrun talk is that the Senators, which might be the part I think that's probably holding up this trade and making it more complicated, is that the Senators would be insistent on the Coyotes, who need to take on money anyway and have the ability to do so, to take Nikita Zaitsev. He's got 2 years left at like $4.5 million. If you look at a buyout does not make sense, because they are going to get a new buyout window now that Matthew Joseph has signed, because he was going through arbitration, so they will get a buyout window coming up here in a couple days. I don't think another buyout in Ottawa makes any sense. They've already bought out White and Del Zotto. If you look at the Zaitsev contract, they'd only save, I think, about just over $1.5 million this year and next, and then they have 2 extra years with some dead space. If need be, if they can't find a move here and they can't trade Zaitsev, they could put him through waivers and bury him into minors. It wouldn't be quite as much of a cap savings as a buyout, but it's going to keep him on the books and not have all that dead space after. So I don't think there's really any any desire to do a buyout in that case. I'd be shocked if they went down that road. I don't really think it makes sense for them. But even if they had to retain a little bit or something in a trade, but getting Zaitsev to Arizona has been part of the plan. But he does have a modified no trade. I think there's 10 teams, I think it is, that he can block. And if they're on that list, that might be part of what's holding things up here too. Now, of course, there's no guarantee that they even have a deal lined up that's acceptable to both sides pending other stuff. We haven't heard that. I don't think things are that far. I would suspect that the Senators would have to add a sweetener to take Zaitsev, as well as a fair asking price for Chychrun. So you're looking at probably, I'm going to guess, at least 1 or 2 young players and a couple of picks at the very least. So you're probably looking at players like maybe like an Alex Formenton, maybe an Eric Brandstrom, maybe a first-round pick next year, or a second-round pick. I don't know, like some kind of combination of younger players and picks would have to be included in this deal, along with Zaitsev, to make it worth their while. But there seems to be enough coming from enough places that it seems like a pretty legit thing that's it's actively being talked about. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, of course, but I do know that Chychrun does have ties to the area. I can say from my own personal knowledge what my thought is saying that it makes sense. So we'll see. Chychrun can play both sides. He could certainly fit the need. The contract's right. The age is right. I think he knows a lot of the guys on the team, so it really would be an excellent fit if they can pull it off, and see if the summer of Pierre can continue. I don't know. We'll have to see. That's kind of like the missing piece, though. They need that one more defenseman to play on the right side, because that's the weak point of the team. For sure, it was one of the weaker points last year, too. They've addressed a lot of other things. They've addressed goaltending. They've added 2 top 6 forwards, but they can't ignore the D, because they're going to end up one of those teams, if they don't, that they're going to have to always score themselves out of trouble. And we've seen how that works for some teams. You can have some level of success, but it's hard to have a prolonged success and playoff success, which they're ultimately going to want to follow things up with if they can have that good of a season. So we'll see. And of course, Andy Strickland's talking here in his latest episode of his podcast. Strickland's saying that he's been told that the Dallas Stars really want to shake things up and maybe add another top player to the mix here. And that Patrick Kane's a name that he's heard that they'd have interest in. Now, of course, we've talked a lot about Kane and Taves lately, based on Jonathan Taves' recent comments in an interview with Mark Lazarus of The Athletic, saying that how exhausting it is to go through all this losing, and that this rebuild doesn't seem like something he's really down for the next 5 years. So it makes a lot of sense that both these players move on, whether it be now or at the deadline or sometime before their contract expires, so that the Blackhawks can recoup some assets, right? So ultimately, we've talked a bit about Patrick Kane the last few days, because there's been a lot of rumors popping up on what teams might be interested, and the Dallas Stars are the latest ones to kind of get into that category. It does make some sense. Of course, a couple of reasons he cites is one, they've been a team that's been mediocre. They have an aging core. Looking at a lot of the players on the team are getting up there. You've got Joe Pavelski still playing at a high level, but getting up there. Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin are not getting any younger either. Of course, you've got some players on the back end like a Ryan Suter. They have some good young pieces there that are going to keep this team. They don't need to rebuild or anything of that nature, because they have a lot of young pieces that are already in place. They've done a kind of a good job at kind of starting to work their way getting younger, I think, without tearing it down. But they're kind of going to have to give up a few good pieces to get Kane, if that's the case. Cap-wise, I think you're probably looking at Gurianov and Faxa. Money-wise, that would make perfect sense. Then they do have some really interesting prospects that Chicago might like, and they might have to part with at least one of them. You got Wyatt Johnston from the OHL. You got Logan Stankoven from the Western Hockey League. You get Ty Dellandrea. Of course, and there's Antonio Strangers have been getting a lot of highlights. Hard to say what he's going to be at the NHL, but he's turning into quite the highlight reel himself, but some pretty amazing plays that we've seen here as of late. They have defenseman Thomas Harley looking for a bigger role, who's young and eager to be a big part of this as well. They're pretty well stocked. The Dallas Stars are pretty well situated in that respect, and they could certainly afford to move one. Of course, the best of the bunch might even be Maverick Bourque too. Maverick Bourque's a former first-round pick, was playing in the Quebec League for Shawinigan. He's going to be might even be better than Johnston and Stankoven. They're all very different in some respects, but like they've got some pretty intriguing players there. Chicago would be more than, I think, entertained by what they would have to offer, and I think a Kane trade would be very reasonable myself. So we'll have to wait and see. But the Patrick Kane sweepstakes are heating up now. I don't think that, just want to clarify too, when it comes to Patrick Kane, we're not at a stage where teams are really having like intense conversations. I think this is like the early tire kicking stage. I think Dallas has interest, just like we've talked about in the last few days, about teams like Colorado or the Islanders or Edmonton having interest. It doesn't mean they've had meaningful conversations at all. They may have kicked some tires. They may have had a brief conversation around, hey, do you think you're planning to move him? Have you talked to him about waiving his no move clause? Do you think he'd come here? What kind of, just some, early outline parameters just to kind of get the ball started, so to speak. I know Mark Lazarus of The Athletic, who covers the Blackhawks, he followed up the statement from Strickland saying that he's checked with his sources and that no trade talks have really taken place, because I think that's fair to say, nothing formal, nothing official. I think it's just early interest and early tire kicking, and we'll see where it goes. But the Dallas Stars do make some sense. So let me know your thoughts on that and everything else discussed here today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.